Lily in California actually has a very interesting question that I feel like we would have fun playing with.
Sure, let's go ahead and take Lily. In the meantime, it looks like there was a tech issue, and we're still working it out, everybody. But we lost a couple of callers that were sitting in the queue. So if you were dropped, please call back in. And if you want to talk to us, now's the time to call in. 585-526-8774. That's 585-LaMurph. Or call in online. We have so many people from England right now that are calling. You can go to tiny.cc/s, or what is it?
You just spelled it before.
Tiny.cc/callsg. That's tiny.cc/CALLSG. We want to talk to you and want to know what you believe and why. But now,
let's go to Lily in California.
Hey, Lily.
Lily, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on, guys. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm excited for you to be here too.
Yeah, and as for the interaction or the flyer entry 10 minutes before the show, if it was a gigantic thread, that was probably me. That's a story for another time, but
all right.
It was a fun morning. But I'm here. We got philosophy to work on.
Okay.
All right. What's up?
Yeah.
I call myself a mathematician. I'm not formally trained. I'm actually entering a math degree next year.
Nice.
But as far as like the technical side of math and those subjects goes, that's where I focus. But I've been more and more as I mature, been getting into the philosophy of math side of things.
Ooh.
And there's this question of invention versus discovery that I've noticed my perspective has been shifting on probably the most. So I think that's a good place to focus. And that's kind of why I'm bringing it up on the show, hoping to hear your guys' perspectives as well.
Absolutely. Okay. Also, I just love the idea, like you pinpointed that so beautifully, Lily, where you were like, this is the area where I sense my perspective shifting. So let's hone in on that, right? And that is really what we're all about. That is the antithesis of that is, oh no, I sense weak ground, run away, right? Like, this is awesome. Right. I love this.
It's just as a behind the scenes, when V and I do this, we will just like zoom in and peck each other to pieces on these individual things. So,
yeah,
we're happy that you're calling.
What's up?
So my plan is to take you through like the way that I've thought about it and that I've shifted over time to give you the best view that I can of my position, so that when you guys take over, it'll give us the best chance to do something productive. Okay. So to start with, I've always sort of held this like invented view. That's sort of where I've been residing. And my main argument, at least at first, was if it's not invented, what would it mean to invent? Can you call anything else an invention? The metaphor that I like to use is the light bulb. If you're not inventing the light bulb, you're discovering a combination of physical interactions, and if I take this atom with, if I'm remembering correctly, 74 protons in its nucleus tungsten and stretch it into a thin filament and pass a current through it, I get light. I just discovered that combination yields that result. I didn't invent anything.
I've thought of the same thing with the quote unquote invention of fire, right? The first people who created fire were probably like, this is fucking magic. What the fuck? And as you know, like as you get down into it, you're like, oh no, this reaction produces this result. We just found out that was the case.
Right. And then what then would be the nature of invention? Is it the moment that let's say I have this great invention, the flammity-diddly-flammity-doo, and when I think flammity-diddly, is that the moment that I've invented it? Do I have to write down or articulate through speech plans to another human being? Do I have to build a physical flammity-diddly?
I would say...
What point is there an invention?
Oh, I love this. This is exactly my kind of call. So I would say, now push back on this if you think this is different, the moment you can replicate it a second time. So there are people who have invented things that have failed the second that they were put into the real world. I think this applies to math, where you can invent like an equation, I suppose. But the only use that we have for the word is when we can point to something that is useful, essentially. So I would say if you made a flammity-diddly-doo and you did it a second time, or you told me how to make one and I could also make one, you will have invented that thing. How does that strike you?
I agree with you because I disagree so much. This is like a weird horseshoe theory thing. Ooh. I'm going to try and take you through this. Sorry if I messed something up. But I personally am very much, so I will start with an analogy. I'll start with just a minor thing that sort of irked me, is when you talked about purpose and replication in mathematics, because that's sort of this idea of applying applied to physics, or you're applying it to cosmology, the equations of motion, the equations of this and that. The purpose of mathematics is, I don't really think we can do that just because it has a physical use. And in the same way, my high school used to host, before COVID, these charity concerts for an organization called Music for Memory. Mm-hmm. And what they do is they get MP3 players and give them to dementia patients so that it can help with their memory. But the point of music is not medicine, nor is it memory. It's beautiful music, right? Just because it can be applied somewhere useful, that does not mean that is its purpose. To move on to the issue at hand, I think that invention is more about what happens, what pops into your mind. And to connect that to discovery, we use our physical senses to discover things about the physical world. Right now in front of me, there is a keyboard. I use my physical sense of sight to see it there. I can touch it right now. I can interact with it with my physical senses. I see invention, and the language is going to get kind of floaty here because I don't have very good language just yet for this, but it's sort of the sense interface with a world of these abstracts. These ideas exist in the abstract, and that invention is my interface with that. Just as physical senses are an interface with the physical, my mind is an interface with those ideas.
Okay, so you're saying the ideas exist outside of you somehow, and you are interfacing with them?
I mean, this is sort of where I run into walls. Because there's the world, there's sort of this language, I believe, from Plato, where you might have a world of abstracts, a world of forms.
Right, right.
And I think thinking about where it is kind of, maybe the term would be category error. Like, if it's not physical, what does having a physical location mean?
Right, which is where we get the problems with God being existent before the universe. Yeah. But no, right, so are you a Platonist, or are you an idealist in that sense?
I probably flip-flop 5 or 6 times a day. We're going to skip that one for now.
The mark of a true philosopher, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
When it comes to philosophy of math, the label, I'm pretty sure is probably conventionalist. Basically, that we should choose the axioms for the results they produce rather than the human intuition that might be the more discovery sense, like our intuition about how rocks behave when you group them. That might be an analog of addition and group theory. But because we can build different sets of axioms that have different consequences. That's sort of like a formalist sort of view, which is sort of the counter to mathematical realism and Platonism.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sensing maybe an inner contradiction there with my own view, because I'm sort of using the language of the realist in one aspect and the non-realist in the other. Oh, bother.
It does not necessarily mean that they're incompatible. Right. And often we find ourselves, we often find ourselves kind of picking and taking those things and kind of refining them for ourselves. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing. The category error piece is the piece that I latched onto, because I think that therein is where I kind of break it apart. Mm-hmm. When it comes to, numbers, well, let's talk about numbers, right? There is one apple.
Yeah.
What is the number one in the context of that sentence? It is a descriptor for the apple. Right? How many of that apple are there? There's one of them, right? That one is just a descriptor. It does not exist in space somewhere independent of the apple being described. It is a descriptor. And so when we're interacting with math, right, just because it leads to and can lead to true conclusions does not mean that it is something else. They're still descriptors. It's just the way that we're applying them. They're incredibly useful. It's those applications. Like, you jump into a pool, you get wet. Is the fact that you're actually wet make wetness something that exists outside of describing a thing? Right? It's still an adjective.
Right, but I think maybe where they're coming from is this concept of, okay, well, you say wetness. is wetness the emergent property of a cluster of water molecules without the experience of also being wet? Or can you only be wet if you are experiencing wetness?
That is an entirely different conversation, I think.
Oh, I'm off of my own.
Yeah, I think I'm more on Eric's line here, V.
Okay, I'm on my own journey.
I want to have that quality conversation.
We will absolutely have that another time.
You should absolutely call in about that one.
I should call in about that.
No. I not you. Oh, God damn it. No, I feel like that. I think Lily should call in about that again later, because I think that parallels qualia in a big way. But
I've never thought about the philosophy of math that way. Damn it. I'm going to spend my entire summer thinking about this now. Thank you so much.
Well, I mean, if you trace it back, there are a lot of polymaths, people who would call themselves philosophers, mathematicians. You have these, it was, it's the scientific revolution, right? It branched out from, finding these rules. The thing is what it is, isn't what it isn't, and can't be what it is and what it isn't at the same time. It's application of the scientific method. And by doing that, you get these branching areas, of mathematics, of science, of biology, of chemistry, and you just go on and on and on. And but they share that branch going up. And so understanding where all of that comes from definitely can help you prevent yourself from falling into a hole, and that hole being category errors.
Right.
So when you're doing math, right? When you're doing math that is absolutely devoid of context, right? 2 + 2 = 4. We don't know if we're talking about apples or Daffy Ducks. That is context dependent on, you don't know
like maybe
whether or not it pertains to anything true in the world, right? You just know how to interact with those things if they're true, right? And one of the fallacies that I think really folds in here is confusing the map and the place. And I think that understanding this and wrestling with this is going to help keep you from confusing the map and the place, right? So we can do 2 + 2 = 4. Two Daffy Ducks + 2 Daffy Ducks = 4 Daffy Ducks. If Daffy Ducks existed, we've shown that we know how to add them. and
right. That's sort of
go ahead.
Like Karl Popper's 2 senses, if you're familiar.
It has been 4 years since I've read Popper. I do not remember a damn thing. Help me.
So the idea is, if we take a statement like 2 Daffys + 2 Daffys = 4 Daffys, there's the sense in which it's logically verifiable, right? 2 + 2 = 4. We can build from Peano's axioms or a set theoretic construction of addition similar to von Neumann's ordinals. You can build that way just purely from axioms and logic.
Right.
But there's also this sense when you're applying it to Daffys, where we're testing essentially
but we have no Daffys
work as units in that way when you relate them and try and relate those concepts.
You got it. And the way that I keep them apart in my head is I remember that there's a difference between the map and the place. And if you're adding them devoid of that context, you are drawing a map, and that's fantastic. And we can apply that elsewhere, right? We can draw a map of Middle Earth, and you can see where Mordor is in relation to the Shire.
Internally, it's consistent.
But that doesn't, and that consistency is fantastic. We can build worlds out of that. We can understand so much about that, but that doesn't mean that the place exists. It just means that you can draw the map. And that is where math is incredibly useful, is we can draw maps to places that don't ever need to exist. Go ahead.
Okay. So to relate this back to invention and discovery with the map and the place, when we draw the map, when we set the axioms in place that we're going to use to, whether we're doing it this way or that way, we include the axiom of choice or we exclude the axiom of choice. That's building a map. When we try and apply it to the real world, that's when the discovery happens. Even the consequences of axioms, like higher order statements in the logic of a system, when we derive a system of calculus or something from our axioms, we're still building a map.
I at that point, I think the words invention and discovery
kind of blur.
Yeah, I mean, really, when it comes to language,
that's where I'm at too.
But that's okay because
fuzzier.
Well, that's because language is what we're creating to try and describe concepts. And so long as we can understand what the other person means, then we can have a meaningful conversation. And so you got to a place where it's fuzzy, but here's the awesome thing. The awesome thing is, if you want to create, and it is absolutely, up to you, but if you want to create a difference between them, then we can have a more nuanced conversation about it. I use the talking about the difference between sex and gender, right? When we create a difference between those words, we can have a much more nuanced conversation. So I think that if you
remember that initially they were different. Ooh.
I'm trying to describe.
I know.
Sorry, Eric, but
I just want to be included.
I'm sorry, V. And we're getting way off. I'm sure we're losing a whole bunch of people. But Lily, please call in, especially about the quality thing, because I want to see you and V have that conversation.
Y'all are my kind of people. This discussion was so much fun. I'll definitely think about the quality of things, and I'll also think about some of those language barriers to try and maybe get us a bit further if we can, when I call back.
This is so awesome. My jams. Oh,
absolutely.
And also watch the comments underneath, because the all caps, holy crap, you were wrong about this thing, is amazing. I love it. So
I love reading that too.
You just told someone to read the comments.
Share me a new one, please.
Wow.
Yeah, same here. Take care.
All right. Thanks so much, Lily.
I loved that. That was a good call. Oh my gosh, that is just my flavor of esoteric.
Yeah, right.
Oh. Okay.